I bought an old lighthouse to escape. I instead found only madness. By Avatarofhorror. Maria's voice was the first thing I heard. It was faint at first, a whisper carried on the salty breeze as I stood at the dock in White Harbour, watching the ferry bring supplies for the tiny island I had decided to call home. At first, I thought I imagined it, but the longer I stared at the weatherboard silhouette of the lighthouse rising from the barren rock offshore, the more certain I became of her presence. Come. Maria's voice called, soft and lilting, threading through the crash of waves and the distant cries of gulls. I shook my head as if the physical attempt would quiet my mind. She had been gone for nearly a year by then. That fact alone should have been enough to dismiss the whispering as a trick of my grieving mind, but it wasn't. I felt her as surely as I felt the sting of the sea air against my face, and though I would never admit it, not to the locals or even myself, her voice was the reason I bought the lighthouse. The agent selling it had called it a historic property, though in truth it was a crumbling ruin, a relic of the 19th century that had long outlived its usefulness. The light had gone out decades ago, and the mainlanders seemed content to let it rot. The townspeople in White Harbour didn't understand why anyone would want to live out there, on a barren rock where the wind howled and the waves hammered the cliffs with fury. The lighthouse was no longer needed in this day and age of satellite navigation. Hell, the lighthouse itself didn't even work as far as I knew. They didn't know the comfort I felt when I stared out at the lighthouse from the mainland, how the isolation called to me as much as Maria's voice. It's bad luck, an old fisherman warned me as I had finalised the paperwork at the harbour master's office. His skin was weathered as old driftwood, and his eyes were sharp beneath a furrowed brow. Lighthouse is cursed, always has been. You'd do well to stay on this side of the water. I thanked him and said nothing more. The truth was, I didn't care about curses or superstitions. I needed the solitude. My grief had become too unwieldy to carry in public, and after months of sympathy and sideways glances from co-workers and neighbours, I wanted nothing more than to be alone. The lighthouse offered that isolation in spades, perched on a barren island reachable only by boat. The lighthouse was weathered but standing, its tower leaning slightly against the battering of decades. The keeper's cottage, though small and in need of repair, was enough for my needs. The stones that made up the foundation were carved with faint, twisting patterns, spiky and deliberate. At first, I thought they were merely decorative, though their thorn-like designs seemed oddly purposeful. The first few days on the island were uneventful. I spent my time clearing out the keeper's cottage and making it livable, scrubbing mildew from the walls and patching the roof where it sagged. The work was exhausting, but I welcomed the distraction. At night, I would sit on the rocky shore and watch the moonlight ripple across the waves, feeling a strange sort of peace settle over me. I was sadly mistaken in my newfound attempts at a new life. The first dream came on my third night. In it, Maria stood on the edge of the cliffs, her dark hair whipped back by the wind. She didn't turn to look at me, but instead raised an arm and pointed toward the lighthouse. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and though her face was obscured, I felt her desperation, her urgency. When I woke, my throat was raw, as though I'd been screaming. The dreams continued over the next week, each more vivid than the last. In one, Maria was walking along the beach, her footprints vanishing into the foam as she called my name. In another, she stood in the lighthouse tower, the shattered lens behind her casting refracted light across her face. During the day, I dismissed the dreams as manifestations of my grief, which was exactly why I wanted to escape here. But they left me restless, irritable, and plagued by a strange sense of unease I couldn't shake. The cottage seemed darker than it should have been, its corners shadowed even in full daylight. The wind carried faint whispers that I told myself were only the sounds of the sea. I found myself watching the tower constantly during the day when I was not working, the warmth of a cup of coffee lingering in my hand. Something about the lighthouse itself began to feel organic, alive in a way. The foundation stones were carved with strange, twisting patterns that I had dismissed as withering when I first arrived. But the more I looked at them, the more deliberate they looked, like thorned vines curling into intricate shapes, some of which resembled faces or staring eyes. The carvings appeared elsewhere too, on the walls of the basement, around the frame of the spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. I told myself I was imagining things and swore at myself. I had made this choice for a new existence, one free of grief that hung to me. This was my subconscious rebelling, giving me the finger, and I vowed to curse it right back. On my 9th day, while cleaning out the basement, I found a trapdoor. It was hidden beneath a rotted tarp, its iron ring rusted almost to dust. At first, I thought it was a storage hatch. With considerable physical effort, I pried it open. The cold, damp air that rose from below brought with it a smell I can only describe as ancient, earthy, salty, and faintly sweet, like fruit left to rot. As I stared into the darkness, I heard her voice again, and I froze. "Come to me," Maria whispered, her voice soft and pleading. I snapped the trapdoor shut and bolted it, my hands shaking. For hours, I paced the cottage, arguing with myself. It was the grief, I told myself, nothing more than my mind projecting what I wanted to hear. But her voice had felt so real, so immediate. If I could just go towards her. That night, I barely slept. The dreams had changed. Maria no longer stood on the shore or in the tower. Instead, she was in the dark, surrounded by twisting, thorned vines. Her voice echoed in the blackness, a desperate plea that I couldn't ignore. The next day, trying desperately to think of anything else other than the trapdoor, I discovered a diary. I found it in a small room off the lighthouse's main staircase, tucked behind a stack of rotting wooden crates. Its leather cover was cracked and warped, and the pages were yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible, a hurried scrawl that spoke of the experiences of the previous occupant of this lighthouse. The dream started again. One entry read, "At first, I thought it was my son returning to me from its loss at sea. But it's not. It's something else. The thorns were trying to tell me, but I didn't listen. God in heaven help me. I didn't listen." Another entry read, "The light is failing. I can feel the hum of it weakening. When it goes out, what will happen? Will the eyes open? Will it be me that opens them? The light could be so blinding, couldn't it?" The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting shakier and less coherent until they ended abruptly. When I brought this lighthouse, there was no mention of what happened to the writer, but I didn't need it spelled out. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that the diary was the product of a disturbed mind here alone. I was stronger, better, smarter. I must be. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it though, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of my vision, and the hum of the wind carried a resonance that set my teeth on edge. But as I lay in bed that night, Maria's voice returned, stronger than ever. "Come to me," she whispered. Her voice was so close, so warm, that for a moment I thought she was standing by my bed. The next morning, I woke to find that I had been sleepwalking. My feet were caked with dirt and salt, and there was a faint, lingering smell of damp earth that clung to my skin. My memories of the night before were fragmented, dreamlike, visions of thorned vines twisting around the lighthouse walls, Maria's voice calling me downward. I had enough. This failed venture to escape my pain had clearly failed. I was now becoming delusional. I left the island that day, determined to leave the dreams and whispers behind. For a few days, I thought it had worked. I had stayed in the hotel in the town, and the whispers of Maria on the ocean breeze were distant. But the visions followed me. I could see Maria standing in the distance wherever I went, on the shore or in the crowded streets of the mainland. Even in the silence of my rented room, I could see her. I could see her. Don't you get it? I saw her as clearly as you read this text. "Come back," she whispered. "I need you." The dreams grew worse, more vivid and consuming. In them, I saw a chamber beneath the lighthouse, a vast, circular room lined with glowing thorned carvings that writhed like living things. At the center was a pedestal, and on it lay a book bound in dark leather that seemed to glisten like oil. I returned to the island. There was no peace away from it. There was no peace on it. I was trapped. I needed to know what was real, as I had lost sense of reality. Upon reaching the island, I rushed to the damp basement and flung the trapdoor open. What greeted me were stone stairs that descended into pitch blackness. I grabbed a flashlight and plunged into the unknown. The stairs spiraled deep into the earth, far deeper than the lighthouse's foundation should have allowed. I walked for at least 30 minutes without stopping, and the stairs just kept going. An echo of Maria's voice bouncing through the stairwell kept me moving forward. The walls were smooth stone, damp and etched with more of the thorn-like carvings. These were larger and more detailed the longer I descended, twisting around crude shapes that looked like eyes peering deep into my very being. When I reached the end of the staircase, my feet hit wet sand. I looked up to see a circular chamber. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like an invisible weight. The thorn on the walls glowed faintly, their light pulsing. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a book, its surface glistening. The thorns etched into the pedestal were thicker and more intricate than the others I'd seen, forming a barrier around the book that seemed to keep me away. But as I approached, I heard Maria's voice in the room. I searched everywhere, but saw nothing. The words echoed and reverberated. The sound caused the thorns to recede, curling back like vines burned by invisible fire. When I touched the book, it creaked open, and the air in the chamber grew heavier, pressing against my chest like the weight of an ocean. The words inside were written in a script I couldn't read, yet I understood them perfectly. They spoke of a great series of ever-watching eyes through the cosmos, It is watching. It is searching. It was eternal. It needed help. I turned to see Maria standing beside me. I swear to you now we touched, and it was real. But her skin was not the warmth of life I knew. It was cold and wet as the depths of the sea that carried her voice. Maria's voice called to me as she looked into my eyes, soft and pleading. "You can bring me back," she whispered. "You can free me. Just help me out of here." The thorns in the room recoiled and wilted, leading to the staircase I had just descended. "Help me," she pleaded. My hand hovered over the face. The skin felt rough and wet to my touch as my eyes told me it was my love. "You're dead. You can't be here." She cocked her head as if confused. "I'm right here before you. Take me with you. Take this book with you and help me escape. You've heard me. You know me. You see me." I stumbled backwards into one of the thorn bushes. I caught myself on one of the branches, causing blood to gush from my hand. I looked away from Maria to see blood drip down, and when I returned my view to her, I saw only a humanoid mass of sand standing by the pedestal. The illusion shattered. It leapt for me. We struggled on the ground. The sand mass, having strength unknown to me, tossed me across the ground with ease. I tried to fight, but each blow was absorbed by the watery earth. The faceless thing spoke to me. "The eyes must open. You will release me." The voice was no longer hers. It was layered, distorted, and filled with cold malice. Thrown on the ground again, I reached for something, anything, to fight back with. I grimaced in pain as I broke off a branch of nearby thorns, my blood spraying on the ground. I swung it wildly at the sand form, and it scattered on contact with the branch. I ran back up the stone staircase as fast as my legs would take me. The voice of Maria called to me, pleading with me to return. I don't know how long it took. When I burst through the trapdoor hatch, I threw everything around on top of it. Boxes, furniture, crates, anything. The thudding from below was relentless. I thought back to the journal. The light was out. The light had to shine again. I ascended the lighthouse as sweat fell on the stairs while I passed. I spent hours repairing it, using spare parts from the basement. The thudding of the trapdoor grew louder as I worked, a deep, resonant frequency that made my skull ache. By the time I finished, it was night. The sea was black, the horizon blurred by mist. When I lit the lantern, the light pierced the darkness like a blade. The thudding of the trapdoor stopped, and for a moment, the world was still. But then I heard Maria again. I turned to see her standing at the top of the lighthouse with me. "You cannot stop this," she whispered. Her voice was no longer hers. It was layered, 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "The light is only a delay. You called to me, and I came. The breach is open, and you opened it." "What the hell are you?" I yelled in fury. The form of Maria stood before me was distorted. Her limbs were long, and her body stretched and unnatural. "Everything and nothing. You comprehend but a fraction of your reality. Your mind is simply the gateway upon which I travel. You are ephemeral. I am eternal. I see all. I see you." I turned to the repaired light. "This isn't real. None of this is real." Maria smiled wide, longer than a human smile should be, and then faded into the mist of the sea. After hours, I made my way down to where the trapdoor lay in the basement. Piles of boxes and furniture covered the area where I threw them. I waited for any movement, but none came. I pushed the refuse aside, and there was nothing. I searched, and there was nothing. No trapdoor could be found. I searched the lighthouse in vain, and there was nothing. I ripped the lighthouse apart, and no trace of the trapdoor could be found. Had I imagined it all? I looked down at my hands. They were bandaged and bloodied. It had to have happened. It must have. Or did I just cut myself? No, I assured myself. I saved myself. I saved everyone. I sit here now writing this, staring out at the sea, listening to the waves crash on the small shore. It's been weeks and there's still nothing. No Maria, no trapdoor, nothing. I write this as much as a confession of my mania and uncertainty as I do as a warning. I am certain I cannot leave now, not ever. If I falter, if I let the light go out, even for a moment, the eyes will open. They've seen me. I've felt it. I am seen, and I cannot be free.